Piel. Okay, let's look at the Piel binyan. Here's our chart that we're going to look at in detail. Now I've colored it all green here because it doesn't divide up into two groups like the nifal does. If you remember, in the last module we looked at the nifal, and in the nifal we had the perfect and the participle as one group because those were the forms where the nun did not assimilate. You saw the nun here and you saw the nun here, the nifal nun. And then the other forms here, all the prefix forms, were the forms where it did assimilate. And you saw it as a dagesh forte in the first letter. It disappeared and became a dagesh forte. In the case of the Piel, we don't have this dividing up the whole paradigm into two groups. Now, what is the Piel? Well, the Piel is marked. The characteristic of the Piel is the doubling of the second radical. Now remember, I said that each binyan, aside from Kal, of course, Kal is light, the base form, each binyan has a characteristic consonantal change. And consonant changes are big changes. In the nifal, it's the nun. In the Piel, the pual, and the hitpael, it's the doubling of the second radical, the second root letter. So, in all these forms, we'll see a doubling. And we see it here as a dagesh forte, right? If you have kof and kof, which is really what it is, the way you write that in Hebrew is you use a dagesh forte, which just means two kofs together. So, dagesh forte there and there and there, all the way down the perfect, all the way down the imperfect, okay? And these, of course, are built in the imperfect. We see it all the way down there. The participle, infinitive construct, and we have two absolutes, and they both have it. So, it's present in all forms. Let me get rid of my double kof there. So, doubling expressed as dagesh forte in the second consonant. It's present in all forms. Now, sometimes the dagesh forte will be missing due to the coal mine rule. Now, I think we talked about the coal mine rule before, but I'll review it here. You can find details about it in João Maruca's grammar, page 83. What it says is that if any of the coal mine letters, and if you can read this here, it's the kof, the vav, the lamed, the mem, the yud, and the nun, and coal mine is just a mnemonic, helps you remember which consonants we're talking about. If any of the coal mine letters, like a kof for instance, if it has a dagesh or a vocal shava under it, and it's supposed to have a dagesh forte in it, sometimes it will, and sometimes it won't. Okay? Sometimes you'll see it like that, and sometimes like this. And the reason basically is that the vocal shava is such a short vowel that if you try to double your consonant from here to here, if you try to double it, it means you have a lot of consonant for very little vowel. And so sometimes the doubling won't happen. Now, in the case of our paradigm here, where it's the second radical that we're doubling, the place where you get a vocal shava under the second radical is in the vocalic forms. So, 3fs, you have a ending, and when you have a vocalic ending, then the theme vowel reduces to a vocal shava. So in these cases here, where you have reduction, and you end up with this vocal shava, sometimes the dagesh forte will disappear. So you sometimes see it there, sometimes you won't. Now, the ones with the vocalic forms, or the vocalic endings, in the perfect, are the 3fs and the 3mp, right? So, pikada, pikadu. Sometimes the dagesh forte won't be there. And in the imperfect, the ones with the vocalic endings are 2fs, 3mp, and 2mp. So, tifakadi, yifakadu, tifakadu. Again, these are the forms with the vocal shava, so sometimes they'll lose their dagesh forte. But, for the most part, dagesh forte will be there, and it's the main marker of the Piel. Okay, let's look at the perfect. What did I want to say about that? The first vowel is a hidik in all forms. Okay, so the first vowel here is a hidik all the way down. You see that? Now, as you're going through these different modules about covering these different binyan, I would suggest you look at page 544 in your textbook, which is the strong verb paradigm. What I've done actually is photocopy it. I photocopied all those paradigm pages and just stapled them so I have them handy all the time. Now if you look at that and you compare the cal to the Piel, you'll see that the cal has a comets here, right? So open up, take a look. Pakad. That is the marker for the cal perfect. In the Piel you have a hitic there. Now if you go down in the strong verbs, or sorry, in the cal of the strong verb, you get down here with these heavy endings, you'll see that what normally would be a comets here has reduced to a shava. So 2MP and 2FP. Pikkatem, pikkaten in the cal. Well, in the Piel it doesn't reduce. It stays as a shava. And actually end up pronouncing it the same. Pikkatem, pikkaten. The reason it stays is because it's in a closed syllable, because the second radical is doubled. That means that one kof closes the first syllable and one kof opens the next syllable. Okay? Minor point, not that important, but just note that here in the Piel, the first vowel carries all the way through. In the cal, it reduces in these two forms. So it's more consistent in the Piel. Does not reduce because it's in closed syllable. Okay, first vowel is hitic. Now the theme vowel, which is the second vowel, is tsere. So you see it here, but in the perfect you only see the tsere in the 3ms form. In all the other forms it's different. So it's not terribly helpful in the perfect. You only see it in the 3ms form. In these two forms, these are the ones with the vocalic endings, right? So theme vowel reduces, so that's explainable. We've already talked about that. The tsere becomes a vocal shava. So shava before vocal suffix, second vowel. And then in these forms, the second and first person, we see that it's gone to a patach. Now, this is a behavior we're going to see in other paradigms as well. We'll have something going on here with the third person, and then there'll be a switch. I call it the second person switch, because as you're reading down the paradigm, you'll get a switch in the second person, and it carries over in the third person. Then you're back again to what you had up here for the third person, and you get a second person switch here. What's going on is that these are the forms in the perfect that have endings that start with consonants, the consonantal endings. You see here? Ta, t, ti, tem, ten, nu. And because these are the forms that happen to have the consonantal endings, sometimes there'll be a resultant behavior that you'll then see in all these forms. Okay? What we have here is that the theme vowel has gone to a patach. So patach before consonantal suffix. So I don't know why it goes to patach. Maybe there's a grammar that talks about that. But there is this second person switch here. So theme vowel is not terribly useful in the perfect. We've got tsere there, which is our true theme vowel. We have reduction in these two because they have vocalic endings. Then we have the second person switch, and it goes to a patach. So it's not going to help you too much there, but it's worth noting that you have that change. Let's move to the imperfect. What can we say about that? The prefix vowel for the imperfect is a vocal shava. Okay. See this here? Now open up your book or take a look at your photocopied chart here and compare the imperfect in the cal. The imperfect in the cal has a hitic here. And actually the imperfect in the nifal also has a hitic for the prefix vowel. Prefix vowels are important markers. And we'll see that the Piel, and if you look over to the right in your chart, you'll see that the pual also has the vocal shava. So shava is a good marker of the Piel imperfect. Okay, all the way down here, see? Shava, 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 shava. Now here, what happened here? You should be able to tell me what happened here, right? Well, a guttural can't take a vocal shava, and so it becomes a compound shava. And it's the compound shava that corresponds to its nearest full vowel. So you have this chataf, patach. Then back to our vocal shava all the way down here. So vocal shava is an important marker. I think I say that here. Important marker of the Piel. Okay. What else can we say about the imperfect? Probably the next vowel. Second vowel is a patach, true in all forms. Okay. Now I called it the second vowel because it's the second vowel as you go along, but maybe it would have been better to call it the first root vowel because pe is your first root, but whatever. Your prefix vowel and your first root vowel, or your first vowel and your second vowel, it's a patach all the way down. And we will see that that patach under the first root vowel is going to carry over here in all these other forms that derive from these forms with the prefix knocked off. So that is kind of important. The patach is your first root vowel in the imperfect and really largely in your prefix forms right here. So patach, second vowel or first root vowel. Now here again, these are our vocalic endings, the forms with the vocalic endings, I, U, and U. What happens there? Tsere. You have a tsere. Okay, what I'm trying to say here is the theme vowel is a tsere all the way through except the ones with vocalic suffixes. Okay? In the perfect, we saw that the theme vowel only showed up in the 3-mess form, tsere, there. The rest of these were all different. But in the imperfect, it carries all the way through except where it's reduced because of the vocalic ending. But that's such a regular behavior, that shouldn't really throw us. But other than that, you'll see tsere all the way through. So tsere is a good marker, and we'll see it all the way through all these other ones too. Tsere, except where it's reduced because of vocalic endings, tsere all the way through. So tsere is a theme vowel for the Piel. It's much stronger in the prefix forms than it is in the perfect form. Theme vowel tsere. Okay, what else do I want to say about imperfect? Okay, the characteristic pattern, the characteristic vowel pattern is shava, patach, plus tsere. What do I mean by that? I mean this here. Shava, patach, tsere. Okay? Shava, patach, tsere. Shava, patach, tsere. And these other forms that derive from this as well. Now, do not confuse this with the nifal. Remember I said that for the nifal, I like to think of them as the a verbs. So, a, it sounds like this, but it's different. Let's compare the two here. The vowels are different and the doubling is different. In terms of the vowels, in the nifal we have a, we have hidik, kamets, and sere. In the piel we have shava, patach, and sere. Now it sounds similar because we happen to pronounce the hidik much like we pronounce the shava. They're both kind of they're short, although this is shorter, but in terms of actual pronunciation, you often pronounce them similarly. And again, the kamets and the patach, if you're following, well, most people pronounce those the same. So they sound the same, but they're different. Visually, what I find useful is this kamets here kind of sticks out to me visually. If I see this combination, that's usually what I see before I look at these doubling. This somehow stands out more to me visually. I don't know. Maybe it does to you too. I don't know. So the vowels are different, even though they sound the same, the vowel combination. And the doubling, of course, is different. In the nifal, we have this dagesh forte in the first radical, which is there because that's our nun, that's assimilated in prefix forms. And the piel, it's in the middle radical because that's our characteristic of the piel. So, characteristic pattern of the piel is shava, patach, tsere. The piel prefix forms, I should say. Okay. Let's move on to our preterite, jussive, and cohortative, which of course build on the imperfect. What can we say for them? They are like the imperfect, except the dagesh forte of the vav consecutive may drop due to the coal mine rule. Okay, obviously it's like the imperfect because it builds on it. Remember, when you add, or when you want to make the preterite, you add this special vav consecutive. And the vav consecutive is a vav, it's got 3 parts to it. Vav, patach, and doubling in the next consonant. This is similar or analogous to the article. Remember the article of 3 parts? You have hey, you have patach, and then you have doubling in the next consonant. It's the doubling that people often forget. So, but what happens when you double, you want to double a yud. Well, the coal mine rule comes into effect, and so the yud may not be there. In fact, the yud is never there. I did a search of all the Piel forms in the all Piel Vav consecutive forms in the third masculine singular and third masculine plural. These are the two that have the yud. Yud marks masculine. And there were 822 of them. Only one had the dagesh. So it really does drop consistently. It happened to be in 2 Chronicles 29:34. Vayechazekum. It's also a weak verb and it has a pronominal suffix on it. So they really do drop in all the other cases. I think I say that here. The dagesh forte will drop for the yud. So it will be this, not this. Okay, you won't see that dagesh there. With the other forms, with the tav, of course, it won't drop because tav is not a coal mine letter. If you look down here, there's no tav in coal mine. There is a nun, but in fact, I did a search for that as well. Now, of course, nun shows up down here, right? So if you put a vav consecutive, you put this thing on here, the question is, will the dagesh forte drop or not? The coal mine rule technically says that it may. In actual fact, it doesn't. I looked up this, and there are only 4 cases in the Bible, and in all of them, the dagesh forte stays. So it's only with the yud that it'll drop, and it'll drop consistently. Tav, it doesn't drop because it's not a coal mine letter. Now, what happens with aleph? If I have an aleph here, and I want to put this here, so my word continues like this. If I want to put a vav consecutive, put the vav, put yud, or patach, and then I want to double this. But I can't double an aleph, right? Because it's a guttural. What happens is you get compensatory lengthening, and so your patach becomes a kametz. And that's typical of what happens in the 1CS form. This here, 1CS form. Not just in Piel. Okay, in fact, if I look at my cal form, I think it happens there too. My table won't show me that because it doesn't show the vav consecutive in the 1CS form. But from what I remember, it does that there too. Okay, so that's what I say down here. With aleph, the patach of the vav lengthens to compensate for the fact that the aleph cannot double. So, right here. Okay, so this is quite a bit of detail here, but to summarize it, your vav consecutive is just like your imperfect, except that with the yud, the dagesh won't be there. With the other forms, it will. Okay, let's look at the imperative and the infinitive construct. These, of course, also build on the imperfect. What can we say there? Same as the imperfect without the prefix. Okay? Remember, that's how we build these. So our masculine singular is going to come from second person, masculine singular, right up here. And so if you take the t off, we get paked. We get paked. Now, the only visual difference here is that this has a dagesh in it and this doesn't. And that's because this is a dagesh lene. This is not a dagesh forte. This is there for euphonic reasons because it is a bagad kafat letter. So, and it starts a syllable. Here it doesn't start a syllable. Here it does. Tifakada, tifakade. Actually, it does start a syllable, but it has a vowel before it. Almost made a mistake there. Okay. So if you look at this one here, 2fs, you take off the t, this is the feminine form, you get fakadi, but of course because it starts a new syllable and there's no vowel preceding it, you get pakadi, pakadi. And likewise here for the 2mp, you knock this off and you get pakadu, pakadu, and tifakadna becomes pakadna, pakadna. So that's how you build these things. So they're the same as the imperfect without the prefix, and here I'm just saying that the dagesh in the imperfect or in the imperative is a dagesh lene, which I already said. Now, one thing to note, or not note, but this patach there is a useful sign. Again, if you look at your chart, and you look at the cal imperative, you'll see that here it has a vocal shava, and here as well, and then these two are hidik. In the Piel, the imperative starts with a patach, and this I found quite useful. What happens as you're reading is that you'll generally see a verb and you'll kind of have a sense because of the context of what kind of verb to expect. And so you may expect an imperative because you're expecting someone to give a command or something like that. If you see a patach there, then it's like, okay, I've got an imperative and I know I have a piel imperative. And maybe that'll change the meaning of the word because a piel maybe is an intensive of the same thing in the cal or whatever. So noting that the imperative has the patach in the piel as opposed to hidik or shava in the cal, that's a useful thing to note. At least I've found it to be useful when I read. Okay, so that's imperative and infinitive construct. Oh, I should say infinitive construct is the same as the imperative here in the PL. Okay, paked, identical form. Now let's look at the participle. Again, look at your chart. I want to show you something. If you look at your chart of strong verbs on page 544 and you look at the area where it outlines the participles, you'll see that in the cal you have two, of course. You have both the active and the passive. And in the nifal, you just have passive. But if you look at the piel, the puel, the hitpal, hifiel, and hofal, look at all the other participles, you'll see they all start with mem. Okay, this mem prefix here, the mem is the marker of the participle for piel onwards. Not for kal and nifal. If you look at those, you'll see they don't have mem, but the rest of them do. So that's the marker of the participle. Now this hidik or this shava here is going to give us a clue that we probably have a piel. The puel will have a shava there as well, I think, yes, but it has a different vowel here. So shava, vocal shava marks piel or puel. Okay, what am I going to say here? The participle is marked with mem. The vowels are the same as the imperfect. Okay, mifaked. Let's go over to the imperfect. Yifaked. Okay, so vowels are the same, and mem marks the participle in piel, puel, hitpal, hifiel, and hofal. Okay, now let's finally look here at the infinitive absolute. We see we have two forms. The one is paked, which is the same as our infinitive construct and our masculine singular imperative. And the other form has the holem vav, which we've come to expect in the infinitive absolute. And again, we have the patach starting things off, the first root vowel, which you've seen all the way through here. And of course, that comes, or it's the same as what we have in the imperfect. So let's see what I wanted to say here. The infinitive absolute, usually the same as the infinitive construct. Okay? What that means is this is the common form. It's usually this one, not this one, because this one's the same as that. May have holem vav or holem, which is characteristic of the infinitive absolute. Okay, so holem vav here. If you look at your chart again, you'll see that the holem or holem vav is there for the cal and the nifal. Now the piel as well. We'll see it in the pual. The other forms will tend to have tzere. Okay, the hitpal, hifiel, and hofal. But we'll get to those. First vowel is patach. First vowel here is patach. In the cal, it's a kametz. Okay, identical forms. What forms are identical? Well, we have the imperfect and the josive, and that's because in the strong verbs, so this page 544, 545, it's only the hifiel that has a reduced josive. The josive is different than hifiel. All the other ones, they're the same. And then down here we have the imperative masculine singular, the infinitive construct, and the more common infinitive absolute. They're all the same. So those are the identical forms. It's good to note what they are, or at least be aware of them. Piel. Similar forms. What are similar? Okay, what I wanted to note here is that the only difference between the perfect 3ms and these three, which are identical, is the first vowel, first root vowel. So here you have the patach, and here you have the hidik. So if you just remember that, well, remember two things, I guess. Hidik marks the perfect in the Piel, all the way down. And patach marks really it's the whole prefix system. Here it's the first one because the prefix is knocked off. Here it's the first root vowel, but the second vowel because you have a prefix there. But patach is the marker of the imperative. I think that's all I wanted to say. Hidik is perfect, and patach marks all these other forms here. Okay, I think that's my last slide. Yeah. So those are the characteristics of the Piel.